Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonah Rexer. I'm an economist at the World Bank, and I want to thank you all very much for coming out to our discussion today on a topic of critical importance, policy options to raise female employment in India. And thank you to our generous hosts, NCAER, for having us here. Our first session today will feature a presentation of the World Bank South Asia Development Update October 24 edition by Franziska Ohnsorge, the World Bank Chief Economist for South Asia. Joining her as a discussant would be Poonam Gupta, the General Director of NCAER. So I'll introduce our first two speakers. Franziska Ohnsorge is the World Bank Chief Economist for South Asia. In this role, she's responsible for leading the research program on key economic issues in South Asia to inform policy debate in World Bank lending. Previously, she was manager at the Development Economics Vice Presidency, where she spearheaded the Global Economic Prospects Report. Prior to the World Bank, she worked at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development at the IMF. Her research has been featured in peer-reviewed journals as well as a wide range of policy publications and has covered topics from international macroeconomics and finance, debt, financial crises, inflation, monetary policy, and growth. Her work has been widely cited in The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times. Poonam Gupta is the Director General at NCAER, India's largest economic policy think tank. She's a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and a member of the Advisory Council to the 16th Finance Commission. She joined NCAER in 2021 after working at senior positions at the IMF and the World Bank for nearly 2 decades. Her research has been published in scholarly journals and IMF and World Bank publications, and her work is regularly cited by the press, including The Economist, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and Business Standard and Economic Times. So please join me in welcoming our two panelists for the first session. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'll just show a few slides to set the stage for what I'm sure is going to be a lively discussion afterwards, both from Poonam and from our panelists. Just as background, as context, South Asia is the bright spot in the global economy right now and has been for the last 5 years. This chart on the left shows you output growth over the last 5 years and going forward for a couple of years. You can see on the x-axis are all the regions of the World Bank. South Asia is growing much faster than any of the other emerging market and developing economy regions. And of course, much of that is because of India. So the chart on the right shows you South Asia's growth with and without India. So really, India is a bright spot in the global economy. And it could be so much brighter still. That's why we're here today. So I want to go through 3 questions. How much faster could growth be or output be if as many women worked as men? Why is female labor force participation so low in South Asia, and which policies are available? So just to start with some basics. The chart on the left shows you female labor force participation rates in each of our South Asian countries, including India here. That's the blue bars. And the shade is the interquartile range of emerging markets and developing economies. So that's the bulk, the vast majority, well, half, and above that is even more, of emerging markets and developing economies. You can see that all countries other than Bhutan rank in the bottom quartile by female labor force participation. It is truly low. Now, different countries have different definitions, but even if you use the most generous definition, it would still, all the countries here would still, except for Maldives, that's would switch up just barely into that pink shade, but all the other countries would remain in the bottom quartile by female labor force participation. It is really low. But it has increased. And that is an achievement. The chart on the right shows you in the golden diamonds what it was 10 years ago, and the blue bars what it is now. Female labor force participation has been rising, and that's an achievement when in other emerging markets and developing economies it has not. If anything, it's been declining, but really broadly stable. And yet, it could be so, if it was higher, it could generate so much more output and income. So there are 8 models that are widely used in this literature here, and we use all of them to estimate the impact on GDP and per capita incomes if as large a share of women worked as men. That's what you see in the chart on the left. The line is the actual real GDP, standardized to an index to 2022. And the bar is what these models say. You can see that according to these models, GDP could be anywhere between 13 and 51% higher than it is now if the same share of women worked as men. The top of that range would be achieved if two additional assumptions are made. First, women work in as productive jobs as men do, and not stay in their unproductive, relatively unproductive jobs that they're in now. And second, financial markets are sufficiently flexible to generate the financing needed for investment. So there is this big increase in assumed labor supply would be accompanied by an increase in capital accumulation. If both of these conditions are true, then GDP, both in aggregate and in per capita terms here, could be up to 1/2 higher. That's not enough to get India to high-income country, but it's a good chunk of the way to get there. Now, if it's such a no-brainer, why isn't it higher already? And there's so many factors that hold back female labor force participation. There's labor supply, there is labor demand, there are legal restrictions in some of the countries more than others, and then there's social norms, of course. So labor supply is very well established, lots of excellent research, and I'm sure we'll get to hear more about it. What I want to focus on in these two slides now, the next couple, is the new data that we've generated here. So let's start with labor demand. In most countries, women work in exports and they work in services. So for example, we have the benchmark here in the golden diamonds. In the services industry, in the average emerging market and developing economy, about 50% of employees are female. Non-services less. Now, as it turns out, both these sectors are fairly small in South Asia. So in the chart on the right, you have the export to GDP ratio, and you have the services employment to total employment ratio. And you can see that this is one topic that we explore in much more depth in the rest of the report, but we won't get to today, that South Asia is really fairly close. So the blue bar shows you the range of South Asian countries, and the yellow whiskers are the interquartile range of emerging markets, all of them. You can see that on exports to GDP, South Asian countries, all of them, except for the two small states, all the bigger ones, are rank in the bottom quartile of emerging markets and developing economies. So really, the region as a whole is fairly closed. Every single one of the countries are not small states, so not Bhutan, Maldives. Something similar for services employment. Services sectors are actually very small in South Asia. So you see here, the only reason that blue bar bites a little bit into the yellow whiskers is Sri Lanka, the tourism industry. But even that is well below the average for emerging markets and developing economies. So actually services, the two sectors that normally employ women are fairly small across South Asia. And one of them stands out from emerging markets and from other countries too. So go back to the left chart here. Like everywhere else, exports employ more women. Export industries employ more women. So you can see here, for example, the data for South Asia shows you that almost half of the employed in export industries are women. Much more, like 3 times as much as in non-traded sectors. So more exports would be good for female labor force participation. Would be good for many things, but would also be good for female labor force participation. Services employment, that's where South Asia differs from other countries, from other emerging markets and developing economies. In other emerging markets and developing economies, services is where women work, the golden diamonds. Not in South Asia. It seems that in South Asia, women work in agriculture and in construction. You can see here, in services, the share of female employed is much lower than in non-services industries. So there is some additional factor, and well, multiple additional factors probably, but let me pick 2 of them, where we have new data to show you. One is legal rights, the other is social expectations. So this is on the chart on the left, we show you the World Bank's latest Women, Business and the Law Index of legal gender equality. And it shows you that 3 of our countries are in the bottom quartile by gender equality of the laws on paper. And 2 are sort of near the bottom quartile, and 1 country, India, is kind of in the middle It's kind of within what's normal among emerging markets and developing economies. But this is on paper. Implementation is less than what's on paper, the actual implementation. There's some research that showed, for example, that the fairly gender equal inheritance rights are not always implemented as intended. So that's one aspect. The second one is social norms. So the social norms is the idea that it's the social environment that's holding women back, that's preventing women from really working outside the home. It's very difficult to get data on this. Very, very difficult. So the one cross-country database that we have found is a biased one, but it is the only one we're aware of with cross-country data. It asks Facebook users, so people who actually use the internet and Facebook, so it's, that's the group we're talking about. It asks Facebook users, do you believe in a female homemaker norm? Should women stay at home and be the heart of the family? And again, the pink strip is the interquartile range for other emerging markets and developing economies. And it shows that in 4 of South Asian countries, including India, the share of people who believe in this, the social expectation is in the top quartile. So the social expectations among the most conservative in emerging markets and developing economies. And that matters. So we've done a cross-country regression here in the chart on the right, where we correlate, no claim to causality, but we correlate the female labor force participation with gender equal laws and with the conservatism of social norms. And it turns out both of them are statistically significantly correlated with female labor force participation. What the chart on the right shows you is not the regression coefficients, it shows you how much female labor force participation might be higher if a country in the bottom quartile moved to the top quartile by gender equality and by liberalism of social expectations. And it's material, it's meaningful differences, somewhere between 3 and 9%. That could be, that female labor force participation might have been higher if the legal provisions, the legislation was more gender equal, or social expectations were less conservative. So what does that mean for policy? And that's the tricky bit. So there is lots and lots of evidence that individual policies have helped individuals. So transport safety, training programs, female entrepreneurship programs, all these things have been shown to help. The difficulty is they help individuals. It's much harder to get impact at scale, millions of women into the labor markets. So that suggests that it really needs movements on all fronts. It needs bigger labor demand. It needs more labor supply, which is what a lot of the literature talks about. It needs, in some cases, stronger laws or better implementation of more gender equal implementation of the laws. And of course, any of these measures would be more effective if social norms were a bit more favorable to women working. But I want to point especially to increased labor demand. Remember that's one low-hanging fruit. Remember that women are female employment share is much larger in export-oriented industries than other industries. And that's one bit of all of South Asian economies, including India, which is actually fairly small. And where there's lots of low-hanging fruit that could be achieved by opening up, which would also have other benefits, productivity gains, etc., and employment for men too. And with that, the bottom line, this is the bright spot of the global economy. South Asia is, and in particular India is. It could be brighter still. Growth could be higher if this untapped potential of working women could be unlocked. But it'll probably need a lot of policies to come together to create the right investment for millions of women to enter the labor market. Thank you.
Thank you, Franziska, for this opportunity to hear your views on this very important topic. Many of you know that I don't work on gender. I'm a macroeconomist, feminist at heart, but not in through my research. But Franziska convinced me to come and offer my views both on her report as well as anything else related to the issue. So one caveat is that at NCER we do everything in a gender neutral way, but that's not obvious when you look at the dais. We had invited, we had hoped for a more diverse panel, but then there were cancellations last minute, and we are still hoping for one gentleman to come, even if a little late. I agree with whatever Franziska said. And so therefore, as a discussant, my job is less exciting. I really like to find faults in the work and then make a big deal out of that. I cannot do that today, except that when Franziska says increase in exports is a low-hanging fruit, it's anything but. One doesn't know the reverse causality, but the eminent panelists who know more about these issues, and I'm sure they will weigh on that. So we all agree, those in the room. My worry about gender often is that we are trying to convert the converts. We are here because we believe in the issue. There are millions and billions out there who are not even aware of the issue, let alone thinking that it's something we need to work upon. But so let me talk to the converts that there is certainly a large untapped potential of women in the workforce. The issue seems more specific to the region we live in, that is South Asia. Certainly compared to East Asia. And the number of reasons why female participation in labor force is low in South Asia. As the panelists will reflect on them, their supply side issues, their demand side issues, their institutional issues, legal, societal norms, etc. Given how complex and entrenched the issue has been, therefore, and if we all believe that this issue is important, we need a lot of different actions. The question is, who will take those actions? What kind of policy actions and what kind of policy tools are we talking about? And how much of it has to be a personal effort, starting in every home? I'll speak a little bit like a non-specialist. As I said, I don't do research. I don't know the literature. I don't work on this data, so please bear with me. So what is the role for policy and what are the policy tools we are really talking about? Is it not possible that growth, prosperity, changing demography, which will result in a wage and skill premium eventually, given that women are more educated, I would assume resulting in more liberal mindsets, can all of these together not take care of this issue and increase the role of women to a just full share in the society and economy? And so here I'm taking the liberty of drawing on some work I had done in an op-ed. So all my views on gender are contained in a 1,000-word op-ed which I had written for Business Standard. And the background was that for a short period of time I had committed to doing a monthly column for them. And the month I had to write my next column, the Nobel Prize was announced and Claudia Goldin had won it. So I just read some of her work. And I realized that whatever she has done in her, several decades worth of research was as applicable for India and South Asia as it was for the US in the earlier decades when she was doing most of her work. So her research showed that more women enter the workforce when a number of conditions are met. The appropriate jobs, the demand side. For example, in the services sector that Franziska mentioned, women are more educated. Now, it's a stumbling block that India and I think rest of South Asia has started to overcome as well. They can independently decide their family composition, when to have children, how many children to have, etc. When societal stigma, discriminatory legislation, and other institutional barriers are removed, these, I think, in my mind, are the hardest to overcome. They're role models to emulate. It's very, very important. It ties in with one point I make about the lack of women leadership. And that's where the role of policy can be important. And care economy, that many of those who are interested in this issue have started to talk about. But importantly, her work shows that economic growth in itself in the past has not bridged gender gaps, at least within the time period that one is interested in. Instead, it can become a constraint on further growth. And I think that's the lens that I buy. So while Golden's work was on the US, but I found her findings resonated, and I thought that they're applicable to India as well. In India, despite a shift towards an increasingly service sector-oriented economy and a marked reduction in gender gaps in education and otherwise, the employment deficit has remained wide. There is a heated debate in India driven by a few personalities, I would say, which rather than solving the problem, start claiming the problem does not exist. Now, it's really worrisome when you start saying, you know what, the ratios are good. So I don't engage then, I just withdraw. But if I engage, I would say, so has the parity been achieved? No, there might be a small improvement over how badly we were sucking and now we suck a little less. And no, that doesn't mean that the problem has been solved. So, but what does one do about it when the problem has persisted for decades and centuries and is entrenched and it's important for India? What do you do? And for the rest of the region and the world. So the view I took on the op-ed, with apologies to people who study these set of issues more scientifically, is that we need a holistic gender strategy which consists of fiscal measures, administrative measures, regulatory measures. Public messaging is very, very important. Now, one may say that, it will take time. That's okay. I mean, things haven't moved much. The needle hasn't moved much. So let's just take a patient approach of public messaging. You may recall in India, there was a messaging of Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Save the girl child, educate the girl child. It has shown results. So can we come up with a similar slogan for making women an equal partner in everything, a gender-neutral approach to everything, a gender lens perhaps to everything? We are setting up a new center at NCER on gender and macro. And perhaps the first thing we will do is we will do a little contest for school children, for young women and men. Can we come up with a cute slogan which resonates right away? Public messaging can bring out changes that fiscal and monetary policies may take time to bring about, and the issue is very, very entrenched, as I said. So first of all, what are some of the things that I talked about in that op-ed? I have brought a subset here. One is the care economy. When do women find time to work? When everybody expects, and they start expecting themselves, it's my duty to give a healthy, nutritious, delicious meal 3 times a day on the table. Perhaps nobody's telling them. So I've started to think that this care economy change, when we say that, Sudeep, don't take my idea on this slogan. Huh? I'm saying, we will do it. We are happy to collaborate.
We actually have a slogan called Hum Money. 15 million people have done.
No, it's not resonating. We'll come up with a better one. So care economy. I mean, I think those conversations really have to start at home. I'm, again, not working on gender, but if there's something I can tell women, I'll tell them that invest in who look after your house. It's an investment in yourself. Even if it may seem, how much more money to be put out every month, believe me, in the long run, it all pays out. And it will pay out in more ways than you can imagine. So yes, there's a role for public policy here. And there are a number of donors and others who are talking about care economy, but these conversations can very well start at home. Who's doing what? And is every family member working up to her comparative advantage? I'm a great researcher and now a decent administrator as well. I can clean up the house too, and I can cook a decent meal, but should I be doing those? Or should somebody else be doing that so that I can concentrate on doing things that I'm better at, comparative advantage? When women step out to work, they generate a lot more direct employment, not just their own employment, because every woman who steps out to work, she creates 2 or 3 employment at home. So those are the kind of ways we can bring out this messaging for women themselves, for family members, and certainly for policymakers. My own view is, and some of you may not like it, if we just expect the government to do something about the care economy, Without unbundling it, we may not get a lot of progress made. Second, now here is the observation many of you have had from East Asian economies where every woman is mobile. In India, many women, when they have to step out, they reach out to a brother, a son, and a husband to drive them somewhere. And that is where you lose all your independence and your autonomy. How do we make our women more mobile? How can they choose for themselves where they want to go and they just pick up their vehicle of choice and they just leave? And this is where the role of fiscal policy can be important. Can we give women a tax break, easier access to credit, lower interest rate, easier driving licenses, etc., so they can own their first vehicle? Very important in my mind, something we don't talk about. Safety. An issue we thought we had overcome has surfaced in ugly ways. How do we make every place safe? People tell me, make the workplaces safe. How about the commute? How about what they do on the weekend? I grew up in older times. I still don't step out of the house at 7:30. It's late, it's dark, right? Why? So how can we have women own every space in the country equally? How about the role of policy making? How about more women in police force? 10% of Indian police force consists of women. Can we increase that number? Hire any additional posts. So don't touch your incumbents. That's how you can kill everything. Just create more positions to be filled by women. More women as transport operators. More women everywhere, initially funded on public money, and eventually it will just start a force of itself. Gender neutral behavior among boys and girls. When I grew up, as an after school activity, I took home science. And why? And there were no boys in my class, right? My parents told me you have to learn some cooking, so go to the home science class. How do we inculcate gender neutral behavior from a very early age? Again, do we want policymakers to step into it, or do we want to start making the change at home? And how can policy messaging work for something like this? Leadership gap. In the op-ed that I had written, I had actually singled out many top positions in economics for which we still have those glass ceilings intact. And they remain intact. So the new MPC has been announced. Guess how many men and how many women? 3 men, 0 women. So when every 2 months then India's monetary policy would be decided, 6 men would be deciding what should India's monetary policy be. 3, the RBI bankers, and 3 outside people. This is the world we live in. Lack of women's leadership is not a pipeline issue, it's a mindset issue. Pipelines can be built, it's harder. Every single time we do a big event, we want women keynote speakers, we want women chairs, and it's a thin pipeline. But we need to all work together. And finally, when we have a Ministry of Women and Child Development, women and child together, I have a problem with that. You're saying that women's main role is to be the mother. How about we call it the Ministry of Mother and Child Development, which is a very worthy cause. But if we are really interested in giving women their rightful space, should we have a Ministry of Gender Parity with the only aim of women-led development? So if we do all of the above, I don't know who will do it and whether we'll just keep talking among ourselves, things can change. So for me, gender parity is not just an economic issue, it is equally a human rights issue. I'm not going to rooms and selling them, you know what, you'll grow 3 percentage points higher. I don't care, maybe we'll grow at 7%. But we do want women to be, an actor, to be a contributor to that 7% growth. Forget about 10%, 7%. I want my space there in 7%. But for India, it would be the key to becoming an advanced economy by 2047. Thank you.
Our second session today is going to feature several eminent experts on the Indian economy. So I'll introduce them as well. Ashwini Deshpande is professor and head of the Department of Economics and founding director at the Center for Economic Data and Analysis at Ashoka University. Her PhD and early publications have been on international debt crises of the 1980s. Subsequently, she's been working on the economics of discrimination and affirmative action with a focus on caste and gender in India. She has published extensively in leading scholarly journals and a number of books and edited volumes. She's a fellow of the International Economic Association and received the Exim Bank Award for Outstanding Dissertation in 1994 and the VKRV Rao Award for Indian Economists Under 45 in 2022. Our next panelist is Anuradha Guru, who serves as the economic advisor in the Department of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Finance. Throughout her career, she's held various roles within the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Thank you. She also has experience working at the National Stock Exchange of India. Prior to this, Dr. Guru served as the executive director at the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, where she managed a diverse portfolio including individual insolvency and bankruptcy matters. Dr. Guru has published numerous publications and papers and articles in top journals and newspapers on a wide range of topics. Our third panelist is A.K. Shiva Kumar, who's a development economist and evaluator who works on issues related to human development, poverty, health, nutrition, education, and the rights of women and children. He's co-chair of the No Violence in Childhood, a global learning initiative that synthesizes evidence to advocate for ending violence. He teaches economics and public policy as a visiting faculty member at Ashoka University and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. In addition to serving as an advisor to UNICEF India, he's a member of India's National Advisory Council. And our moderator is Sonalde Desai. She is a distinguished university professor emerita at the University of Maryland and a professor and center director at NCAER, the National Data Innovation Center here in New Delhi. Her work primarily focuses on social transformation and its impact on the lives of individuals with a focus on education, employment, gender, and maternal and child health. She leads the India Human Development Survey, the IHDS, which many of us have used and is an incredible research resource. And she's published extensively in Indian and international journals and served on editorial boards of several major journals. She's a frequent contributor to Indian English language newspapers. Join me in welcoming our three panelists and moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Franziska and Poonam. It was an incredible discussion. Presentation was succinct but very thoughtful in terms of the breadth of the topics it sort of focused on. I'm going to actually take off from where Poonam ended, which is talking about Claudia Goldin, or where she began, but talk about Claudia Goldin a bit. I think we have three major debates on which we will be focusing this panel discussion. The first one is around data. Okay? With India, the issues have been that female labor force participation rate declined from 2004 to roughly about 2017, and then it increased, and yet it has been very increased in a particular format. So it would be lovely to sort of talk about specifically what are the data that we can bank on and analyze as we sort of try to give empirical contours to this work. The second part of it has been around demand for labor. A lot of conversation has sort of focused on supply of labor, because when we talk about sort of women's childcare responsibility, we start sort of thinking about it, childcare responsibilities are what, or domestic care work responsibilities are what is holding women back. Claudia Goldin actually in her most recent work focused not on the female labor supply as much as the demands of the workplace, and she talked about the greedy workplace which demanded too much of the workers. I think that in India there is this whole history actually of women's movement which has focused on reduction in care work. In no country in the world actually there has been equalization of care work. What has happened is actually reduction in the care work. And in India, for 3 decades, there has been sort of a women's movement which has talked about reduction in care work, reduction in demand on women through, water and sanitation provisions, through LPG and clean gas provisions, through improved transportation, through restructuring how the cities are set up so that the commuting becomes easier. So let's talk a little bit about demand for labor and what are the forces that sort of shape it. And the final one is around social norms. Increasingly, there has emerged sort of this great advocacy, which has focused on social norms as sort of determinants of keeping women back at home. And we'll discuss it. But it's very interesting that if you look at the global literature, what we find is that norms often seem to respond to behavior. So for example, in demographic literature, when fertility was declining sharply, the norms regarding what is the ideal family size were not falling that rapidly. Okay? So the question is, to what extent norms really determine our behaviors? In India, the big example is actually that MG and REGA has actually drawn in so many women into the workforce who had never been part of the workforce before. Okay? So the question is, how much do these norms matter? Now we have three wonderful panelists, and what I'm going to do is have each topic sort of be discussed by the three of them. So the first question is going to be for Ashwini. Ashwini, official data often tend to underestimate female labor force participation because surveys sometimes don't capture certain types of activities like work on the family farm and so on. Okay? What do you think would be better measures of female labor force participation, and how do we think about this up and down process of Indian female labor force participation?
Thank you, Sonal. It was a pleasure to be here, and great discussion in the first part of the event today. So let me just get straight to the answer. It's absolutely correct that Indian data sets, with the exception of IHDS, which Sonal leads, underestimate women's economic work. And I'm not talking about domestic work or care work, but it's economic work, that activities that get counted in within the SNA boundary or India's GDP. But when women do it, they are usually think of it as part of the family enterprises, and so they don't get adequately captured. And so there is an issue about under mismeasurement, which the latest economic survey has tried to correct for. And it's important to correct for that. However, the correction for the underestimation doesn't accord women a say in the family business or a status of a worker. They cannot go to a bank, for example, and take a loan. So we also have to be mindful of that. But the larger point that I want to make today, Sonal, in the context of the discussion earlier, and those who attended the gender conclave organized by Sonal cannot answer this question, but I'm going to ask the question which I had asked even then. With all its faults and with all its mismeasurement and with all the undercounting, let's stick to NSS employment unemployment survey data, which is the one that showed the decline, which we believe, right? We all believe that there was a decline. According to the very same data set, can somebody tell me in 1999-2000, what was the female labor force participation rate? Same data set, no change in measurement. 50%, right? So in 1999-2000, with the same mismeasured data, the female labor force participation rate was 50%. It started declining from 2004-05 onwards. It declined up to 17-18. Now the subsequent increase between 17-18 and 22-23, there are issues about that, and I've written about it. I'm happy to send a link. I won't talk about it today. But while I see, there's a large part of the presentation that I'm in agreement with, the fact is that we have to understand that, first of all, India has had, with the mismeasurement, 50% labor force participation, which we sort of forget. It wasn't that far ago. It was just 25 years ago. And it declined over a particular period during which other economic changes were also happening. Within economics, I'm always advocating for an interdisciplinary approach. But that doesn't mean that we forget about the economic factors altogether. And I'm hoping, Sonal, that you'll ask me another question where I can answer what the economic factors were that happened specifically over the period between 2004-05 and 17-18 that led to a decline in female labor force participation rate. using NSS data, if you use IHDS data, in fact, it doesn't show a decline because they do a better job of measuring women's work. So the problem is, I mean, I have written, and all of us have written extensively about the issues related to female labor force participation. So the attempt is not to throw the problem under the carpet, or to not, the problem is to understand the actual causes. And it links to the last topic of discussion that you have, and I'll say more there. But I think that when we think of what are the causes that have resulted in a low level and led to a decline, and are now subsequently leading to also an increase, we should be prepared to accept that maybe there is no one cause, or maybe there are multiple causes, and there could be a chief cause, and there could be supplementary causes. As long as we are in this thing of finding that one single magic rod, which the magic wand, which we wave and then the problem disappears, that's not going to happen. And just by comparison, 1970 in Italy, anybody knows what the female labor force participation rate was? 40%. Mexico today is under 50%, right? Yet when we think of norms, it only comes up in the context of South Asia and India. So I think we also need to think about different parts of the world outside the MENA and the South Asia region that have had earlier in the past low female labor force participation rates or continue, and what is it that changed there? Having said all that, let me come back to the mismeasurement and completely agree that a large part of the economic work is mismeasured, and we need to fix that both in terms of the official statistics, but more importantly, in according to the women, the status of legitimate workers, that not only that they get counted in the labor force, but they also are regarded by society, by their families, by formal institutions as workers.
Thank you. No, that's a great answer. I'm going to turn to Anuradha now and ask her a little bit about the labor force participation data since 2018, there has been a pronounced upward trend. So what do you think is behind it? What kind of jobs have grown? Can you just talk a little about it? Yeah.
So thank you. So as I think other panelists have also mentioned, that there have been policy interventions by the government and also by the private sector to enhance the labor force participation in recent times. We are seeing a very upward trend. The latest 2023-24 PLFS data shows a PLFR of 41.7%, which is again a marked improvement from 37% of the previous year. So as you would know, the government has taken a lot of holistical measures to on various aspects of common women's life, which have actually shown results. These are largely in terms of, as also Dr. Desai mentioned, freeing up of time of women largely in rural areas where provision of drinking water, LPG connections, all of this which have made life easier for them, and they have had extra time to devote to family businesses or small family run shops, or even on their own basic farms. There have been recent research, I think there's one research by Professor Goldar, which shows that the rise in access to tap water has actually been associated with rising female labor force participation, which is a very recent study of 2024. So these measures are showing actually results at the ground level. In rural areas, Anganwadi centers are again a big plus, which are actually aiding female labor force participation in rural areas. Further, direct measures such as investment in education, skilling, also cultivating female entrepreneurship. Education is another way the female labor enrollment in higher education has been expanding. It's now at 2 crores, up from 1.5 crores some years back. However, in recent times, if there is another aspect to rising female enrollments in higher education, also means that they are delaying participation in the workforce right away. But we are hoping to see that over time, there will be quality workforce which will join once there is more skilling and more greater amount of higher education. In the skilling aspects, also the government has been intervening. The PM Kaushal Vikas Yojana, which has trained about the training of females under this Yojana has increased by 42%. From 15-16 to 52% women are being trained. Under Jan Shiksha Sansthan scheme also, women have constituted 82% of total beneficiaries. Then the ecosystem of ITIs and National Skill Training Institutes, the participation of women has increased from 9% in 15-16 to about 13% recently. There is also the National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme, again where the women participation has enhanced from 7% in 16-17 to about 20% in recent years. In regards to entrepreneurship, again, a number of measures have been taken. About 68% of the loans are being sanctioned to women entrepreneurs under the PM Mudra Yojana. Under the stand-up scheme, again, 77% of the beneficiaries are women. So I think there's a number of research and data which show that number of actions are bearing fruit, and as regards further enhancement, as also pointed out by Dr. Gupta, care economy, agro-processing, these are the sectors that we think can further enhance women participation. We can come to that a little later in the discussion. But our economic survey of 2024 has put a lot of effort in putting together some policy measures that we suggest going forward to further enhance the female labor force participation. Thank you.
So, just extracting from India a little bit away, you've done a fair amount of cross-national work. What's your sense about sort of female labor force participation in India in comparison to some of the other developing countries?
Thank you. I want to say that many years ago in 2001, I co-authored a report with Kalyani Menon Sen, and it was called Women in India, How Free, How Equal. And the reason we did this was it was turn of the century and we wanted to take stock of the position of women. Clearly we couldn't use how much more women are earning or in terms of property rights. So we used the matrix of rights and freedoms. And we discussed the right to health, the right to education, the freedom from fear, the freedom to participate in decision making, and the freedom to work without exploitation. And I must say, if you look back today, there have been several areas of progress, and I want to highlight 5 that are extremely relevant to what we are talking about. So I want to first start with the good news, and then we'll come to the not so good news. First is that we must recognize that women are having fewer children today than they had 20 years ago. The total fertility rate in 1998-99 was almost 3, and today it's down to 2. And in urban India, the TFR is 1.6. So that really has reduced the burden on women. Second, women are staying more and staying longer in school. Of course, the primary school enrollment rate has crossed 100%, but progressively we are seeing that more and more women and young girls are staying in school. Third, early marriage had always been a stumbling block for girls. And here also we see remarkable progress. In 1998-99, almost half of the girls were getting married, 48% before the age of 18. Today, this is down to less than a quarter, 23%. Fourth, teenage pregnancy was another major hurdle because, for young girls to enter the labor market, this has also improved. 98-99 to 16%, that's a large proportion of women aged 15 to 19 began childbearing. Today it's down to 7. And last point I want to make, the 5th improvement, is in terms of child labor. We don't have reliable data, but whatever we have known is that the prevalence of child labor has declined over the past 2 decades. And this is partly because of the increase in incomes per capita, in real per capita incomes, the reduction in poverty, and certainly improved access to schooling. So all this is a good news in terms of how it has created conditions for more women to enter the labor force. I'm not getting into the debate on numbers, which is right or wrong in the country. But if you ask me to ask again the question through the lens of freedom and equality, when it comes to work, how free are women, Indian women to work, and how equal are Indian women, I'll just give you 2 statistics. The ILO presents data on female labor force participation for 111 countries of the world. There are only 11 countries that report lower rates of female labor force participation than India. And all those 11 countries are largely Islamic societies, 93, 99% Islamic countries. So you would sit here thinking that, yes, we know all about Islamic society, women enjoy far fewer freedoms than women in other cultures, but then it's not very heartening to realize that India is number 12 in the global ranking. So in terms of the freedom that women have to work, we have a long way to go. How equal? Today, there's a 40 percentage point difference between male-female labor force participation, male labor force participation and female labor force participation. This is about the highest you can get in the world at this point of time, except in the Islamic countries. So the question is really, what progress have we made? And I buy the point that economic growth and expansion of incomes are not going to bridge inequalities of this kind. So while we saw a lot of progress in the last 20 years, the situation for women is quite dismal, I would say, and particularly when you compare it with the opportunities that men have. Thank you.
Thank you. This is interesting. Moving on to sort of looking at it, kind of jobs that women do in greater detail. One of the challenges that India has faced is you think that education would lead to increase in labor force participation, and yet the least educated women are working and the most educated women are working. It's the in-between who don't seem to have appropriate jobs and don't seem to be working. So and you think that, with a movement, with agriculture having a lower share of GDP, there would be more jobs being created for women. But it doesn't quite seem to be happening. So I wanted to turn to Anuradha and ask her, what was your thought in terms of future of how we see our labor markets moving, how the job creation might entice women into the labor force? What kind of sectors growth would make a big difference?
So I think, as I alluded to in my earlier remarks, faster job creation alone will not solve the problem of low female labor force participation, as I think Professor Gupta also put together a lot of to-do things that still remain to be done. Personally, if you say, I would say the mindset has to change, and mindset of the women themselves has to change, that caring for the family is not their primary job. It is one of the important jobs, but there is more to do going forward. So other factors, I would say, which will bring females out of their safe places and come out and participate in the labor force would, I would say, wage gap between males and females. There is quite a few estimations. There are a lot of studies which show that there is a wide wage gap in quite a few sectors. I have come across some studies which talk about such cases in the industry of health, caregiving, where about 34% less women earn 34% less than the male in the same profession. So perhaps interventions there would be useful. Other things that could attract women back to workforce would be to largely to reduce their burden from domestic duties and to enhance remuneration. As elaborated, government has been doing a lot of measures, but I would generally say that there is need to create and nurture more ecosystem for skilling, pre-training, in-training services, forming solidarity groups, counseling centers, hand-holding them so that they can actually, for the first timers who are coming out and going for work, there is a sense of belonging to where they are going. Skilling would actually enhance the potential for female entrepreneurship. A number of measures are being taken on those regards, but again, I would say they would require further hand-holding rather than other than their male counterparts. Ultimately, I think that women have to be consciously choosing paid employment and career over sitting at home. Women can be empowered whether she chooses to join paid employment or take up the role of a full-time homemaker. The key word here is choice. And that said, exercising choice is a result of complex measure of cultural and social factors. So one may not be aware of one's freedom actually. So as our panelists have also talked about, are we really free? So perhaps freedom comes from within also and from without also. While the family may be supportive, at some point, and there may be another point where the family is not supportive, but the female wants to move out. So it's a complex mesh of things. I don't think there is one measure that can bring women out to the workforce. But it's a culmination of number of factors: ease of doing business for female, ease of commuting, mobility, safety. All of these norms add up to the whole ecosystem, which will actually get the females to participate more fully in the economic growth of the country.
Thank you. You know, you actually focused on a very important about the ecosystem, that, you know, what the ecosystem that is created through a variety of measures that government takes, which makes it easier for women to work. If we turn to the other side of it, Shiv, what do you think are the measures that international institutions like IMF and World Bank can take to enhance the ecosystem for women to participate in the labor force?
Thank you. I don't think I should give free advice to the World Bank, but nevertheless, this is a good opportunity.
I thought we all do it. Yeah.
Well, let me start by saying that there is more to life than finding a job. We definitely need decent work, but at the same time, the work should not be stressful. We should feel happy about what we are doing. We should be productive. Our contribution should be recognized and rewarded. And I think this is where the real problem is, that we talk of a demographic advantage that India has, but let's not forget that today 36% of children under 5 are stunted. And interestingly, it is 35% of girls under 5 are stunted. These children who are 5 years old today will join the labor force 20 years from now. And when they join the labor force, don't forget that stunting negatively impacts brain development. It leads to delays in cognitive skills and learning abilities. It weakens your immune systems. You're more likely to be susceptible to infections, illnesses, diseases, and even death. So we have a huge handicap in this area. So if you ask me what is the first critical area for the bank or UN agencies, I would certainly say that it has to focus on the health and nutritional well-being of young girls and women. And you know, the first clue, why is there so much high levels of undernutrition? The first clue comes from the proportion of low birth weight babies. Today, estimates vary, but somewhere from 18 to 25% of babies born are of low birth weight in India. And this is really a reflection of the intergenerational transfer of undernutrition from the mother to the child. And if you look at the health and well-being of women, there are 3 factors I want to point. Mother's height. Now, studies have shown that women who are shorter than 145 centimeters are more likely to give birth to low birth weight babies. And this prevalence of short stature women among mothers has not changed in the last 20 years. Almost 10 to 15% of Indian women of reproductive age are shorter than 145 centimeters. And to give you a comparative figure, in Thailand, it would be 5 to 7%. Even though we feel that I picked Thailand only because we know that the Thais are somewhat shorter than Indians, so there is still a reason for that. Second is mother's weight. Low pregnancy body mass index is widespread among Indian women. And if undernourished mothers with a BMI of less than 18.5 are at higher risk of delivering underweight babies. That proportion is also 19% in India. And so that again is a serious problem. It has been improving. It has been improving over the last few years, but still a long way to go. Again, if you go to Thailand, it would be 5, 6, 7%. And the third reason has to do, for such a high proportion of children being stunted, has to do with maternal anemia. Close to 57% of women in the reproductive age are anemic, and this figure is being contested, and I'm told that we may not collect information on anemia in future years, but whatever it is, it seems to be high. So I think we really have to, first area of priority is we cannot dismiss the fact that women's economic contribution to the society will occur only if you improve their health and nutritional well-being. The second area is, again, I'll go back to early marriages. Early marriages and early childbearing, there has been improvement, but marriage is a huge stumbling block. And if you get married at a young age and you have children at a young age, it affects the women's productivity and employment opportunities in the future. And a third area, which for the bank to also, and UN agencies, is to certainly look at school education and improve the quality of school education. We know that enrollment has gone up significantly, but we also know that enrollment is not the same as attendance. Attendance is not the same as participation, and participation is not the same as learning. Our learning achievements are awfully low at this point of time, both in private schools and in public schools. And in fact, if you ask me today, it is the biggest national scam. It is a silent, large national scam that nobody is talking about. Poor parents are sending their children to private schools and are getting nothing for the money that they put in there, with hard-earned money. So we talk about skilling. Skilling is extremely important, but skilling should not become a substitute for good quality school education. And I think that's where we are headed. So I'll stop there. So the three areas are health and nutritional well-being of mothers, do something about early marriages and early childbearing, and third is improve the quality of school education. Thank you.
So, Shiv, your comments actually reminded me of some work I had done at one point in time, where I got very irritated by international organization advocacy for oral rehydration therapy. Okay? When I sort of figured that they must not have ever done oral rehydration therapy for the children, because if you're going to drip small drops in a child's mouth to avert death, mothers would have to stay home at least 5 days a month to be able to handle that based on some of the back of the envelope calculations that I had done. So yes, you know, investing in health of the child and the mother makes a huge difference when it comes to their ability to participate in the labor force. But to turn to Ashwini, Ashwini, one of the things that is consistently argued, and actually so did this report and the presentation that Franziska made, which was that restrictive social norms discourage women from working. Okay? And these are really increasingly being explored in a variety of research literature. Some would even argue that the social norms would become more permissive once the incomes grow. Okay? But of course, we don't necessarily see that in South Asia with growing incomes, and nonetheless, as the report suggests, there are still a lot of social restrictions in terms of social norms. What is your sense around social norms? What's happening in India? How do they affect women's labor force participation?
Can I go there and show some graphs? So I have actually, not today, but I have lots and lots of graphs about changes in social norms in India along multiple dimensions, which I'm not going to show today, but I'll talk about what those graphs show. But I want to highlight, because we are having a conversation about economic factors kind of versus social norms, I hear a dichotomy which I want to push back against a little bit, which is that you can have both. I mean, you can talk about social norms, but also recognize that there might be some fundamental economic challenges. The one norm that I definitely want to talk about has been alluded to by several speakers here, which is the highly unequal division of domestic work and care work. So Indian women, the latest Time Use survey data shows, and I've done some work for the World Bank somewhere sitting here, on average, Indian women spend 9.55, like about 10 times as much time on domestic and care work as men do. And this is amongst the highest ratios in the world. So there is an issue here. It's not that women are necessarily choosing, what you see in the data is how much time they spend. It would be only partially true that women are voluntarily choosing to do this. It's a social norm, it's applicable to societies, to households, and it's just what women have to do. Either they do it themselves or they have to get it done if they have, even if they can outsource it. So this norm definitely will hold women back from accessing jobs if jobs were to be available, because if you have to come back and do all the work, then you really have to think about what is the best use of my time, will I be able to manage so much. However, I think we should also take a step back and look at what's happening to the availability of work. And this is the first, and this is not just about women, it's just about the growing divergence between the increase in working age population in India and the increase in employment. This is from government figures. You can access the data on the RBI website. And you see, what I was talking to earlier, which is from 2004 onwards, not just for women, for everyone, the rate of employment creation basically flattens, right? And so there is a larger context within which you start to see a decline in female labor force participation. So that's economic point number one. Economic point number two is that if you plot the share of agriculture in total employment and female labor force participation rates, they sort of are parallel. So when the share of agriculture in total employment declines, so does female labor force participation rates, because the correlation between the share of agriculture in total employment and female labor force participation rate is extremely high. Agriculture was and continues to be the biggest employer of women, although the share of agriculture itself has gone down. And recently, by the way, you asked about the increase in numbers, and there are lots of reasons. But one thing that you see also in the data is an increase in agricultural share in total employment. Through COVID, one thing that happened was that people went back to agriculture as a means of livelihood, and you see this very perfect parallel. So I have a paper coming out very soon, maybe in a couple of days it will be public, which which causally estimates the relationship between demand for labor and decline in female labor force participation rate. And this graph, actually, if you see the dashed line, you see that between 2004-05 to 17-18, the rate of growth of agricultural employment was negative. Not only were not new jobs getting added, the total number of paid employment opportunities in agriculture was shrinking. This is the larger, people talked about the relationship between macro and female, and there's definitely a relationship. So you have to look at the larger macro picture to understand what was happening to female labor force participation rate. This is the same thing now, looking at total numbers. So again, you see a flat top from 2004-05 onwards. You see an increase in the share of services, but services in India are highly high-tech and are capital intensive. So they are not as employment intensive as would increase female labor force participation rate. So that point about services is extremely valid. And finally, let me now come to the point about the next graph will actually answer what Sonal actually asked me. Sorry for this long-winded detour to get there. This is the U-shape that I think Sonal was referring to earlier in her comments. So if you look at the relationship between education levels and female labor force participation rate, it's a U-shape. The lowest female labor force participation rates are those are by women with middle secondary and high secondary education. This is rural urban. I have this for several years. This is the pattern with respect to education. So that, and I looked at income effect by looking at more directly at income, not just education. You don't see that in India. It's not that the richest women, who also tend to be the most educated, have the lowest female labor force participation. It's not true. You can map that district level income with district level female labor force participation rate. Again, you don't see that income effect, right? So that's one thing. Finally, NSS data used to ask in the employment unemployment survey to women who were not in the paid labor force. So this comes back to the question of norms and willingness. Would you be willing to work for pay? Either regular full-time, regular part-time, occasional full-time and occasional part-time, if work was to be made available at or near your home. Why at or near your home? Because we saw already that women have to do the bulk of the domestic work, so they can only access work. And the amazing thing is that an overwhelming majority of women answered yes to regular work, either part-time or full-time, not occasional work. So they wanted to be in paid work throughout. Some women wanted to be full-time, some women wanted to be part-time. And if you plot that by the education level, you see the exact inverse U-shape. This, I think, is, a very important piece of data that actually questions a lot of this thing that women have internalized norms and they are just not willing to step out. They want to. They really want to. And you see, you go look at this graph, the U-shape, and look at this graph, the inverse U-shape. These data are publicly available, so I'm encouraging everybody to generate their own graphs to verify that this is what it is. And you don't really see, I have not seen anywhere an unwillingness to work if work was to be made available. Yes, they complain about too much domestic work, they complain about lack of transportation. All of these are important issues, and they are constraints, they are barriers, those have to be removed. But is it that women are inherently unwilling to work? And that's why, I appreciate the attempt to triangulate whatever, we all do it, whatever data is available, we try to look at it. But, maybe Facebook self-reported data is not perhaps the best indicator, because there's high selectivity there, right? How many people use Facebook? How many people have digital access? How many people are filling out those surveys? There's huge self-selection there. So perhaps that's on, for example, I follow many of these accounts on Instagram that are called the tradwives in the United States. If I went by the tradwives data, quote unquote, I would get a very different picture of labor force participation in the United States than actually you see in the data. So I follow it for my own interest, because I really want to see what traditional values they want to take the United States back to, and they are obviously anti-abortion and all of that. And it's a very big, they have millions of followers on Instagram. So I follow that too, just to understand the mindset. But it would be a mistake on my part to assume that the tradwives handles together represent what the norms are in the United States. That would not be accurate. While those individuals have huge amounts of following, and we see through Trump supporters that there are people who genuinely believe in those values. But that's not all of United States. Similarly, the Facebook data is not all of India. I just want to humbly submit that. And I think this picture, and I'll end here, actually demonstrates willingness to work. And there are all the issues that everybody has raised are extremely important, but they are not the full picture. So I think that the norms conversation is complicated, but it must be nuanced. It has to be historical. It has to be rooted in a historical context, right? So when the present-day developed countries had the level of GDP that India has today, what was the labor force participation rate? I've looked at Claudia Golden's work. She talks about in the 1960s and 70s, about college-educated women having very low labor force participation rates, and it increased because demand for labor grew. Norms didn't change first. And it's not as though norms change in the household first and then women started to go out to work. And I think India will have to be the same. Create the demand jobs, women will go out, and that will eventually start taking, have a feedback on norms. So very important question, but we have to tread with caution, we have to be historical, we should not generalize beyond what can be generalized. So those are my answers here. Thank you very much.
No, that was great, a very nuanced answer. Thank you, Ashwini. I'll turn to the other side of this particular conversation then that was presented by Franziska, which was around sort of legal systems, and ask Anuradha to comment on it a little bit. What do you think are the sort of legal limitations or restrictions to women's labor force participation in India? For example, things like workplace harassment laws or need to improve policing, etc.
So, a lot of measures have been taken since the days of the Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961 to Domestic Violence Act of 2005 and to the very latest Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act of 2013. So India has come a long way in terms of the legal aspects of maintaining or ensuring female safety. There is some kind of improvement which we see in data like World Bank's Women, Business and Law Index, where we see an improvement, significant improvement across various metrics that track the legal environment for women access aspects such as pay, workplace, marriage, parenthood. So that said, inheritance laws have also been changed recently, and we see that more rights have been given to women. However, again, there's one study, 2021, that we've quoted in the survey also, which shows that despite women-friendly legislation on succession, 14% of landowners in 9 sample states, which this study did of 2021, only 14% landowners are women. So there is a legal framework available, but perhaps there is some bit of implementation issues. We need to dwell more on that. More recently, 4 labor laws which are still under implementation have a lot of provisions enabling safer and greater female labor force participation. Again, however, I think safety is, to me and to mind of a lot of research that we've seen, safety in terms of traveling to the workplace, at the workplace, and around the workplace are most important. While there are these acts in place, how much implementation is being enhanced and is a lot of work is being done on that aspect. More recently, as you would know, in the budget of 2024-25, enhanced allocation has been done for women's safety in terms of the Nirbhaya Fund. Almost 3 times the budget allocation has been improved. And on aspects of implementation to ensure women victims are supported through legal aid, psychological counseling, medical services, all of this fund will go into those aspects. One-stop centers are acting as one-stop solution to women in need. Similarly, there are women helplines, 24 hours emergency are available. So working women's hostels are also being put together as one way in which incentivizing female labor force participation. So legal framework is available, implementation is being enhanced. So I would say it's still work in progress and work will continue, and it is never ending on those aspects, I would say.
Thank you very much. I would now like to ask Franziska and Poonam to respond quickly if they want to, and then we can throw open for questions from the room.
So that was fascinating. So, Ashwani, you are the expert, I'm not an expert, but whatever you said has intrigued me into thinking about the following. So, if it's all or mostly a demand side issue, then our focus of conversations such as these have to be, how do we grow faster? So in that context, whatever the government is doing, a single focus on growth, everything else will fall in place. Seems very interesting because it brings macroeconomists like me back into business. Let's grow faster. But it does not seem like the full story for a number of reasons. Let me complete, and then you can disagree with everything that I said. In my mind, and you would know the evidence better than you do, isn't it true that even if you control for per capita income, India's female participation in labor force is less than what any linear fit would show? Within India, there's a great deal of heterogeneity, right? There are richer and faster growing states which have better female participation in labor force. But are we at parity there? And if not, I wish things were that simple, let's grow faster no matter what. I would even suggest in that case, let's compromise our macroeconomic stability for a bit. Let's just grow whatever it takes, because that would equalize everything. I'm not so sure.
I don't want to go back to this. I want to take Shiv's generous offer to give advice to the World Bank. And it's also a bit in the sense of what Ashwini has been saying, that really it's such a big agenda that it kind of feeds into everything. It's not just about individual measures or social norms, it's a big agenda. I just want to point out that this is also kind of the approach that the World Bank takes. We have almost half of our projects across the whole sweep of topics have a gender lens. So I think your message is very well taken. It's a broader issue that feeds into everything we look at.
So can I please just clarify one?
Sure.
Yeah. So Poonam, just to clarify, I was not talking about growth rate of output at all. I have never done. All those graphs were about growth rate of employment. That's number one. Secondly, I don't actually dispute the decline at all. I have written about the decline. My point is that what is it that explains the decline? I've looked at the contribution of supply side factors. So if you look at the period of decline from 2004-05 to 17-18, many things on the supply side changed. So incomes have risen, Indians have become richer, education levels have risen, various other things have changed. So this paper actually looks at the contribution of supply side factors and then moves to the demand side factors. The fact is that the contribution of the changes in supply side factors to the decline in female labor force participation, so there is no denial of the decline, point number one, the contribution has declined of supply side factors. So if you look at between 11, 12 and 17, 18, only 4% of the decline can be explained by changes in supply side factors. So we have to look elsewhere. And there, the argument that that paper makes is that when you look at services, which is a high growing sector in terms of value added, and that contributes to India's growth in GDP, at the GDP terms, it's not very employment intensive. So the argument that I've given is not at all high growth of output. It's about having perhaps low productivity, but labor intensive manufacturing or non-farm avenues to create non-farm employment, which I'm not opposed at all to rate of growth of GDP. Obviously, everybody wants the country to be richer. That's not the point. But that's not going to automatically generate employment. So I think just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. If I ask for 30 seconds, right? So
Go ahead.
sorry guys, and you can have the last word. So you do not generate employment. Policymaker can generate growth, high productive growth. I don't think it's a starting point to say let's create low productive growth, because then you don't survive. You get neither growth nor employment nor competitiveness. What I'm reading is growth around the world has become less employment intensive, and when that's the case, first, in order to generate the same amount of employment, you have to grow even faster. But then, even so, the issue of gender getting a fair share of that smaller employment that you're generating becomes even more compelling. So the solution cannot be that let's all forgo the machinery, let's start doing by our hands because we're generating more employment. Subsistence becomes an issue in that case. But you can have the last word. I won't ask.
Actually, I'm going to request, give an opportunity to people in the audience to ask any questions. So just raise your hands. So I just saw a hand over there, and then Poonam, and then Asha. So please go ahead in the back.
Thank you. I wanted to understand, thank you so much for this panel discussion. I wanted to know more about, more than increasing FLFP, how do we retain women who are already in the workforce? And this is beyond just the reproductive age when you've had kids. What about when I'm 50 or when I'm turning to 60, when I'm going through menopause or when I'm going through perimenopause? We don't focus so much on the health support which women need in the economy to continue being in the female, to continue sustaining the FLFP. So wanted to know more about what policymakers at the World Bank think about it, and what other professors here think about it. Also because there's a McKinsey and World Economic Forum report which came out recently in June, which talked about the healthcare gaps between men and women throughout their lifespans, and how there's a potential of 1 trillion growth in the world economy for that. So I'm sure in South Asia region as well, there is some scope for expanding. And second thing which I wanted to talk about was how global care chains function. They function similarly in India as well, where when urban women are going out to work, you have more women from rural areas coming to compensate for the care work. But what happens to the children of the rural women who are coming, who are left back in the villages? Then you have more community support who are coming in, and which does not mean there is no monetary compensation which is being given to for the care work for the kids who are being left back at villages. So what about care in those senses?
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to
Thank
know
you.
more about your thoughts on that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think we're going to have 2 more questions and then have responses and then take 1 more round. So Poonam and Asha.
No, a mic is on its
Thank you. I'm so glad to see a panel looking at so many different aspects when we're talking about female labor force participation and not just simply creating jobs or skilling. I'm fascinated always with the conversation on changing social norms that's coming into the discussion. It's very welcome. Ashwini, I absolutely agree with you. The nuanced, we have to tread very carefully and not make any conclusion statements based on what we are hearing. But there's enough data today on changing social norms, which is very different from what happened in the 60s or 70s or even 80s in the US. I mean, if you look at India today, or much of the world, the aspirations of young women and women in general are changing given what they've got exposed to. You know, the other half knows how the better half, if I may say so, lives. And there is some research on the changing attitudes, changing aspirations, and how that links to attitudes. And changing social norms, while we were told from the data and research 15 years ago that it's very difficult to change norms around gender issues, but today it's very different. And some of the work we've done, we were shocked at the changes, but I believe it's not because of what we are doing, but the aspirations of the women. So if we can factor.
Thank you. Asha?
I agree with a lot that's been said, but there's a lot that I disagree with too. So I'm going to basically focus on two things that Franziska said. This is not working. So I can just walk down. Okay. I want to focus on two things that Franziska said. I won't talk about the things that I agree with and talking about the things that I don't agree with. You said if as large a share of women worked as men, GDP could be 13 to 51% higher. That's my first point of disagreement. And then you said if women worked in as productive jobs as men do, and then, in the same vein. I agree with part of the second sentence, that is, if women worked in as productive jobs as men do, in certain sectors is the caveat that I would use. But in many sectors, men are working in equally unproductive jobs. And so making women work as productively as men do in those sectors is not going to help, because they're all working way below par. But the first point about if as large a share of women worked in as men do, then GDP would be skyrocketing in a sense. Then since I'm a lot older than Ashwini, I know that this debate about the invisibility of women's work goes back to the 1970s when it was first raised. And in 1999-2000 is when I first raised the issue of invisibility of women's work. And the fact of the matter is that we are not able to capture the work that women do, and what the I think it was 22 or 23 economic survey did was raise this issue for the first time and recognize the fact that there's a problem with the data. The unfortunate thing is that this doesn't percolate to everything else that's happening and being said in the global scenario. In the national scenario, it's now getting picked up and it's getting nuanced. In the international scenario, it still isn't.
Thank you. So why don't we take some responses from the panel, and then we'll take one more round of questions. Would you like to start?
Maybe Ashwini?
Ashwini, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think only one question for me is from Poonam, I assume. So, no, I have actually always believed that social norms have been improving for the better. The debate is on the other side, which is the argument that they have actually been worsening. And, I have some charts which I already did a popular piece based upon that in the scroll, but I'm also working towards a more academic publication based upon 5 rounds of NFHS data. And you can look at a bunch of indicators, and aspirations is one of the things that comes out most clearly. In fact, I have a blog on our center's website where I talk about fieldwork experiences in rural UP, which I've been engaged in recently. I mean, even though I know that norms have been changing for the better, even I was taken aback at how amazingly confident and aspirational the young women were. and just willing to take on any kind of challenge. It was very humbling as well. So completely with you on that point. I know that, Sonal, you don't want to respond to Poonam, but I just want to say finally that I was referring to the path, for example, that East Asian countries or China have taken. That's a kind of low productivity, labor-intensive manufacturing I was referring to, but that's it. I mean, we can stop at that and we can discuss that. So it wasn't like start digging food from your hands, and go back to a barter economy. That was not what I was suggesting.
Anyone else wants to respond before I turn to Franziska? Shiva, Anuradha? No? Please.
Thank you. So, this point about the productivity is really, really important, because this is part of the large share of informal employment. No? Labor productivity is on par with Africa. No? It's 1/20th of the advanced economy labor productivity. The modeling assumption here is, of course, the comparison between the average productivity of the women and the average productivity of the men, and there's something to be gained. But it's true that there is a broader issue of productivity. And the invisible work, the ILO tries to correct for that, but of course, with all the caveats. No, we use the ILO data for the international comparison, but I totally recognize your point that there is an issue. On the old age question, how do you keep people in the labor force? That applies to men or women. How do you keep them in the labor force? It's difficult to keep them in the labor force. And I'm not sure there's any particular policy that can do that other than just making sure there's strong labor demand and not too much rigidity in wage setting. But I'm not sure there is any particular, I'm not aware of any particular measures targeting women who are older. It's a problem for men and women staying in the labor force.
Thank you. I know we are running out of time. Can we take a few more questions? Yeah. We'll take one more round of questions and then be done. And let's see, we'll start with you, and then there are two more hands raised. Done. Please.
Just a curious question for actually Ashwini and Sonal. Neither of you can answer this. So we've been doing some work in rural areas, and I know we've not really touched upon the demographic divide here, and of age, because we've been talking to women who are in their 30s to early 40s, and it's interesting how you showed the inverse U-shape in terms of willingness to work by education levels. I'm curious to know if by age, because we are finding a lot of 30 to 40-year-olds actually now wanting to re-enter the workforce in rural areas, and we're seeing this for Bihar, we see this in Karnataka. I wonder what the policy options are, what the opportunities available for them are beyond just being an Anganwadi worker, for instance, and not clear on what that entails.
There are two more hands raised. I think yours.
Hello. I wanted to ask in terms of policy interventions for childcare and daycare facilities, to talk more about that, because even though if we have laws which point towards companies of certain size to facilitate this in the workspaces, do we know how much of it is happening and what kind of policy interventions are in place?
Please.
Hi everyone, my name is Vikas. First thing first, I would like to know from you that India has been very aggressive in the recent past in terms of digital payment infrastructure. It has worked in terms of financial inclusion through JAM Trinity, Mudra Yojana and others. So two things I would like to understand. First thing is we are talking about ease of doing business, but if we look at the perspective of ease of credit, then how this can help in women inclusion, because a lot of women are active in the MSME sector, and apart from the agriculture that we have just discussed, they are also very active in this sector. So how this thing can help in their inclusion?
Thank you. Shall we take responses here and then maybe Ed or do okay, Archita has the right. Oh, sorry, I could not see it. Yeah.
My question really is that, when we say that at the macro level, if women took up as productive jobs as men, then GDP will increase. What is really the economic rationale behind it? Like at the micro level, we have a lot of theoretical frameworks that actually say that more women participating in the labor market would mean more bargaining power, which could lead to them taking better decisions. But do we have any theoretical framework that say that at the macro level, if women take up as productive jobs as men do, then it could lead to a growth in the GDP?
Okay, I think we are going to just take responses to this now and then stop. Do you want to? Franziska, you want to start? I guess the last question was very much to you.
The last one is yours. Yeah. So what is the theoretical underpinnings of your conclusion that if women are take as productive jobs in good sectors as men, GDP growth will accelerate? Or GDP?
The theoretical underpinning, this is an assumption. This is an assumption. It doesn't. It's just a modeling assumption. No? We have the model has a number of sectors and it has a number of occupations, and then the assumption is simply where do we put these additional women who are going to enter the labor market? Whether that's how that can be achieved is a completely different matter. That's difficult. That depends on skills. It depends on all the discussion we've been having. But it's an assumption for the modeling.
Let me take another shot at it. Just think of your production function in which you have your labor capital, human capital, and a productivity factor. So the assumption is that your labor and human capital is not being maximized. For some arbitrary constraints, you remove those constraints and that part will pick up and that's how your growth will come.
Anuradha, do you want to handle the childcare question?
So I think it's quite obvious that if your family and your child is taken care of, there is little more possibility of women stepping out for work. In the rural areas, Anganwadis are doing that job. In urban areas, actually we see a lot of NGOs and actually communities coming together, and creches and daycare services are being made available. In recent times, if you're following, MOLE has set up a task force on enhancing female labor force participation. In that forum also, there is this talk about increasing care economy or providing a more institutionalized care facility for elderly and for children, so that females can come out and work. So this is all happening, and I think the correlation is quite obvious. I'm not seen any research on it, but I think it comes very clearly to the mind that all of this do provide an ecosystem where females can come out and work then.
But if I had a single recommendation to make, I would say we should use MGNREGA workers to provide childcare, which generates both work and generates frees up mothers to be in the labor force. Okay? Ashwini and Shiv.
Oh, you can go first.
No, go.
No,
I just want to pick up this point about quality, affordable daycare. I think that is very central. And unlike other things, mothers won't leave a baby if they don't trust the caregiver at this point in time. But this also raises a more fundamental issue about affordability and the role of the state and the role of private markets. So if you look at the life of an ordinary family, today ill health is a major cause of impoverishment. It takes a heavy toll on the lives of people, physical as well as financial. And 2/3 of the healthcare in India is provided by the private sector. So much so that private out-of-pocket expenses is about 50% for a country with a per capita income of $2,400, compared to UK or Canada or France, where private out-of-pocket expenses would be 15%, 12%. Yeah? So, and we have unregulated private sector offering terrible quality healthcare. In fact, Professor Sen will often say that India is caught between quackery and crookery. So you have these guys parading as doctors with no degrees, and you have these high-end hospitals which are also very dubious quality. Take school education. With a per capita income of $2,400, 50% to 60% of our children go to private schools. United States, with a per capita income of $80,000, about 10%, 11% of children are going to private schools. So look at the burden, financial burden of both healthcare and what is the quality of private schools provided by the private markets? Terrible. And there's no accountability. There's no accountability of the private sector in health. There's no accountability of the private sector in school education. So if you're really asking who is responsible for providing good quality, affordable child care, if you're going to add one more element of expense to this family, saying you pay for health, you pay for school education, and now you pay for private, they were not going to do it. Women will never get free of this responsibility. So it is the government's responsibility, and the only way is for the state to step in and, like you're saying, strengthen Anganwadi centers or create childcare facilities like Tamil Nadu has done. The Anganwadi worker is not a volunteer. She's almost a full-time worker, gets phenomenal state benefits. She gets uniform, she gets health care, she gets bonuses, and she's treated with dignity. And then you have something like this. So I can't see any option out except for the state to provide affordable quality care. Yeah? And then I think that is really the essence of what we're talking about. Public spending on health has not increased. It's been stuck at 1.3, 1.4% for 20 years. Public spending on education is stuck at 3% for 15, 20 years. And we don't even know how much this government is going to allocate to childcare, good quality, affordable childcare, when our growth rates are staggeringly high and consistent at 8%. So where is the priority? It really is a question of political priorities and political leadership that determines where we will head. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashwini, last word.
No, a couple of questions came up about, one is about re-entry of older women and one is about retention of women who are older in the workforce. And I think both of these questions are super important. There is a willingness to work out for older women whose children have started going to school or are in, their domestic responsibilities is significantly diminished. But and then somebody mentioned about what does she do other than being an Anganwadi worker. And that brings me to the point of lack of jobs in rural India. So you can work in agriculture or construction, which is the most common sector, or you can do Anganwadi, Asha, maybe bank if there's a bank branch, maybe school if there's a school. Other than that, there are really no opportunities for work, both for men and women, but more so for women. And so I think that brings me back to the point I was making first about not having enough paid employment opportunities, particularly in rural India. And also the fact that we didn't get time to discuss, which is that 90% of India's workforce is in the informal sector. And so while legal changes and legal frameworks are very important, the fact is that a large part of the workforce is outside all of these very important laws that must be there, there's no doubt. But most of the workers are untouched by that because they are just outside the net. And so that's another challenge that I think we need to talk about when we talk about the quality of work and ability of women to be in the workforce.
Thank you very much. I think we could go on for another hour, but we are standing between you and lunch, so let me end here. Thank you.
Let me thank you all, the World Bank, for being a partner in the dissemination of this report. The panelists, they were wonderful. Our moderators, Sonal, unparalleled. I would also thank Pooja and Vibhor for putting it together, and Akash and Navya for behind-the-scene work. We are calling it high tea, but it's really like lunch. Please do join us downstairs. Both our guests and NCR staff. Thank you.